Who are you? No, wait, don't answer that. Because here's the thing. You've already answered it 1,000 times. You've got a name, a job, maybe a family. You remember your childhood, your favorite ice cream, that embarrassing thing you said at a party in 1978. You feel continuous. You feel like a single, unified somebody who woke up this morning as the same person who went to bed last night. But what if I told you that this feeling, this sense of being you, is perhaps the most elaborate magic trick your brain has ever performed? What if identity is just a story? Not a lie, exactly, but a construction. A narrative your brain writes, moment by moment, to make sense of a universe that doesn't care about sense. And here's what's really going to bother you. Your brain is so good at writing this story that you can't tell it's fiction. By the end of this lecture, you're going to understand something profound. You're going to see how your brain builds the experience of being you out of scattered signals and guesswork. You're going to meet the neurological narrator who lives in your left hemisphere, constantly making up explanations for things it doesn't understand. And you're going to confront a question that has puzzled philosophers for millennia. If every atom in your body is replaced over time, who exactly keeps paying your mortgage? Now, I want to be careful here. I'm a physicist, not a neuroscientist or a philosopher. But that's precisely why this topic fascinates me. Because when you look at the question of identity through the lens of physics, when you really think about what you're made of and how you're organized, the whole thing becomes gloriously strange. The physicist in me says, you are atoms, about 7 octillion of them. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, with a little phosphorus and sulfur and trace elements thrown in. These atoms obey the laws of physics. They attract and repel. They bond and break apart. They vibrate with thermal energy. Not one of them has any idea that it's part of a person. And yet here you sit, made of these oblivious particles, pondering your own existence. How does that work? What is this thing called identity, really, when examined closely? That's what we're going to explore. And I promise you, by the time we're done, you'll never look at yourself the same way again. Let's start with something simple. Look at your hand. Go ahead, really look at it. Now, you probably think you're just seeing your hand, right? Light bounces off, hits your eye, brain says, hand, done. But that's not what's happening at all. Your brain is actually doing something remarkable. It's taking incomplete, noisy signals from your retina and constructing an experience. The brain isn't a camera. It's more like a very anxious art student who's been told to paint the world but keeps guessing what's outside the window instead of looking. You see, there's a problem, and it's a big one. Your brain is locked inside a dark skull. It never directly touches reality. All it gets are electrical signals coming in from your senses. And these signals are ambiguous. They don't come labeled. They're just patterns of neural firing that could mean almost anything. So what does your brain do? It predicts. Your brain is constantly generating models of what it expects to happen and then checking those predictions against the signals coming in. When there's a mismatch, you get what scientists call a prediction error, and that error signal travels back up and updates the model. Here's the crazy part. What you actually experience, what you think of as seeing or hearing or feeling, is not the raw sensory data. It's the prediction. It's the model. Neuroscientist Anil Seth calls this a controlled hallucination. Now, before you panic, controlled is the key word here. Under normal circumstances, sensory signals keep your brain's predictions yoked to reality. The hallucination is controlled by feedback from the world. But make no mistake, you are always, always experiencing your brain's best guess about what's out there, never the thing itself. Think about that for a moment. Every sunset you've watched, every face you've loved, every cup of coffee you've tasted, all of it, a construction, a story your brain tells you about reality. Let me make this more concrete with some examples you can actually verify. Right now, as you look at me, or at this screen, your eyes are constantly making tiny jerky movements called saccades. About 3 times per second, your eyes dart to a new position. During those movements, the image on your retina is just a meaningless blur. If your brain showed you that blur, you'd feel motion sick constantly, but you don't. Your brain edits it out. It interpolates. It fills in the gaps so smoothly you never notice the cutting room floor. Here's another one. Color. You think the world is full of color, right? Red apples, blue sky, green grass. But color doesn't exist in the physical world. Out there, there's just electromagnetic radiation of different frequencies. The experience of red is something your brain invents. It's the brain's way of labeling certain frequencies, distinguishing them from others. A colorblind person looks at the same electromagnetic spectrum and experiences different colors. Neither of you is seeing the real colors because there are no real colors to see. There's just the brain's categorization scheme. Now wait. Am I saying the world doesn't exist? That everything is an illusion? No. Be careful here. There is a world. There is reality. But your access to that reality is always mediated by your brain's interpretive machinery. You never touch the raw data. You only get the processed version. Let me give you an example that makes this vivid. You have a blind spot in each eye, right where the optic nerve connects to the retina. There are no photoreceptors. Nothing. A hole in your vision. But you've never noticed it, have you? You don't see two black spots floating in your visual field. Why not? Because your brain fills it in. It predicts what should be there based on the surrounding information and gives you a seamless experience. It's lying to you, in a sense. But it's a very helpful lie. If you want to find your blind spot, here's what you do. Close your left eye. Hold up your left thumb about a foot in front of your face. Look at your thumb with your right eye. Now, keeping your eye fixed on your thumb, slowly move your right hand out to the right. At some point, your right thumb will disappear, vanish. It's fallen into your blind spot. But notice that you don't see a hole. The background just continues, smooth and uninterrupted. Your brain is filling in what it expects to be there. This is not a bug. This is a feature. This is how perception works. And it's not just vision. All your senses work this way. Hearing, touch, smell, taste. They're all constructed. They're all the brain's best guesses, constrained by sensory feedback. Now let's push this further. If perception is a controlled hallucination, what about your sense of self? What about the feeling of being you? Think about what that feeling involves. There's a sense of continuity, that you're the same person you were yesterday, last year, 20 years ago. There's a sense of ownership, that this body belongs to you, that your thoughts are your thoughts. There's a sense of agency, that you're the one making decisions, moving your arm, speaking these words. There's a sense of being located somewhere, behind your eyes, inside your head, looking out at the world. All of that, every bit of it, is also a construction. And here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain doesn't just construct your experience of the external world. It constructs your experience of yourself. The self is not the thing doing the constructing. The self is one of the things being constructed. That's a strange loop, isn't it? The brain is building a model of itself that includes a model of a thing that's doing the building. It's like a snake eating its own tail. But somehow it works. Somehow this self-referential loop gives rise to the subjective experience of being a somebody. Let me tell you about some experiments that will make your head spin. And I mean that literally, because they involve splitting heads. Back in the 60s and 70s, doctors developed a surgery for patients with severe epilepsy. They would cut the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerve fibers connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. This stopped seizures from spreading from one side to the other. The surgery worked pretty well for the seizures. Now, the corpus callosum is not a small thing. It's about 200 million nerve fibers. It's the main information highway between your two hemispheres. Cut it, and the left brain can't talk to the right brain anymore. Not directly, anyway. And this created something extraordinary for scientists to study. Roger Sperry at Caltech, along with his student Michael Gazzaniga, realized they could examine each hemisphere separately. They designed clever experiments using the fact that visual information is processed contralaterally. That is, what you see in your left visual field goes to your right hemisphere, and vice versa. In most people, the hemispheres share everything instantly. If the right brain sees something, the left brain knows about it a fraction of a second later. But in these split-brain patients, The connection was severed. What one hemisphere saw, the other didn't know about. Now, here's where it gets weird. In most people, language processing lies primarily in the left hemisphere. The left brain talks. The right brain has limited language ability. So when they showed a picture to the right hemisphere only, the patient couldn't verbally report what they'd seen. If you asked, "What did you see?" they'd say, "Nothing." Or, "I don't know." But if you asked them to reach behind a screen with their left hand and pick up the object they'd seen, their left hand, controlled by the right brain, could grab the correct item. The right brain saw it. It just couldn't talk about it. You see what's happening here? There are two separate streams of consciousness, in a sense. One can see but not speak. One can speak but didn't see. And they're both in the same skull. Already this is fascinating. It suggests that the unified self we feel might depend on the physical connection between brain regions. Cut the connection and something like two selves can emerge. But Gazzaniga discovered something even more amazing. Something that changed how we think about human nature. He showed a chicken claw to the left hemisphere and a snow scene to the right hemisphere. Then he asked the patient to point to related pictures with each hand. The right hand, following left brain instructions, pointed to a chicken. The left hand, following right brain instructions, pointed to a snow shovel. Makes sense so far. The right brain saw snow, knew you need a shovel for snow. But then Gazzaniga asked the patient why he pointed to the shovel. Remember, the left brain, which does the talking, never saw the snow scene. It has no idea why the left hand pointed to a shovel. The left brain saw a chicken claw and knows about chickens. But a shovel? Where did that come from? Did the patient say, "I don't know"? No. Without missing a beat, he said, "Oh, that's easy. The chicken claw goes with the chicken, and you need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed." He made it up! His left brain, faced with an unexplained action, an action it didn't initiate and can't account for, instantly invented a plausible story. And here's the crucial thing. He wasn't lying. He wasn't being deceptive. He genuinely believed his explanation. He had no sense that he was confabulating. This is extraordinary. Think about what this means. The left brain observed an action. It didn't know the real reason. But instead of saying, "I don't know," which would have been the honest answer, it generated a plausible explanation on the fly. And the patient experienced that explanation as the truth. Gazzaniga called this the left brain interpreter. And he argues it's not just something that appears after brain surgery. We all have one. It's working in your head right now, constantly generating explanations for your behavior, your feelings, your existence. Your brain is a storytelling machine, and you are its favorite character. The interpreter doesn't have access to all the information. It doesn't know about all the unconscious processes that influence your decisions. But it doesn't let that stop it. It just makes stuff up, plausible stuff, stuff that fits the available evidence. And you believe it because you have no way to check. The explanation feels right, and that's all your conscious mind ever gets. Let me give you another example from these split brain patients. In one experiment, Gazzaniga showed a scary video about fire safety to a woman's right hemisphere only. The video was disturbing, someone being pushed into a fire. When asked what she'd seen, she said she thought she saw just a white flash. She couldn't describe the video, but when asked how she felt, she said she felt scared and jumpy. She said maybe she didn't like the room. She even said, "I know I like Dr. Gazzaniga, but right now I'm scared of him for some reason." Her right brain generated an emotion. Her left brain, unaware of the cause, had to explain it. And it did, by fabricating reasons. The room is creepy. The researchers are unsettling. It's confabulation, making up stories that fit the available evidence without realizing they're made up. And we do this all the time. Think about the last time you made a snap decision. Why did you choose that restaurant? Why did you like that person? Why did you feel anxious? You probably have reasons ready to explain your choices. But are those the real reasons? Or are they just stories your left brain interpreter generated after the fact? The research suggests we're confabulating far more than we realize. The real reasons for our actions are often unconscious, inaccessible. But the interpreter doesn't like mysteries. It fills in the blanks. Let me give you some everyday examples. Have you ever walked into a room and forgotten why you came in? You stand there, confused, and then, after a moment, a reason pops into your head. Oh, right, I was getting my glasses. But was that really why you came in? Or did your interpreter just grab the most plausible explanation? Here's another one. You meet someone at a party and immediately dislike them. Your friend asks why. You come up with reasons. They seemed arrogant. Their handshake was too weak. They looked shifty. But maybe the real reason is that they remind you of someone who hurt you in childhood. Your unconscious recognized the resemblance instantly. Your conscious mind never knew about it. The interpreter just generated post hoc justifications for a feeling whose real source was hidden. Or consider purchasing decisions. Marketing researchers have shown again and again that people's stated reasons for buying things often don't match the actual factors that influence them. You say you chose this car because of its safety features, but maybe it was the color that caught your eye first, or the way it made you feel, and the safety rationalization came later. We like to think we're rational agents, making decisions for good reasons and then acting on them. But the research suggests it often works the other way around. We act, and then we invent the reasons. The story comes after the fact. This is humbling, but it's also liberating, if you think about it, right? Once you know the interpreter is there, you can start to question its narratives. You can be more curious. You can ask yourself, is this really why I did that? Or is this just a plausible story? Now, let me connect this to something larger. There's a network of brain regions that scientists call the default mode network, or DMN. It's called default because it's most active when you're not focused on any particular task. When you're daydreaming, mind wandering, thinking about yourself. The default mode network lights up when you think about your past, when you imagine your future, when you consider what other people might be thinking, when you reflect on your own personality and traits. In other words, it's heavily involved in constructing your sense of identity. Now, let me tell you about how this network was discovered, because it's a beautiful example of science working the way it should. Back in the late 90s, researchers were doing brain scanning studies. They'd give people tasks to do, like looking at pictures or doing mental arithmetic, and measure which brain regions became more active, but they also needed baseline measurements. Times when the person was just lying there, not doing any particular task. Here's the thing that puzzled them. During these rest periods, certain brain regions were consistently more active than during the tasks. That seemed backwards. Shouldn't the brain be less active when doing nothing? But it wasn't doing nothing. It was doing something else. Something that stopped when external tasks began. Researchers like Marcus Raichle started investigating. They found that these regions were involved in internal mental life, self-reflection, autobiographical memory, imagining the future, thinking about other people's minds. In other words, when you're not focused on the outside world, your brain defaults to thinking about you, about your life, about your relationships, about your story. This makes evolutionary sense, if you think about it. When there's no immediate task demanding your attention, what's the most useful thing your brain could be doing? Planning for the future, learning from the past, understanding the social landscape. All of these involve modeling yourself and others. All of them involve storytelling. The main hubs of the default mode network are in the medial prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead, and the posterior cingulate cortex, deep in the back of the brain. These regions are connected to the hippocampus, which handles memory, and to areas involved in emotional processing. Together, they weave the narrative of you. Scientists have found that when people with depression struggle to regulate their emotions, their default mode network doesn't quiet down when it should. It stays active, ruminating, replaying negative stories about the self. The storytelling machine gets stuck in an unhelpful loop. And here's something fascinating. In deep meditation, experienced practitioners show reduced activity in the default mode network. That's the feeling they describe. The dissolution of the sense of self, the quieting of the inner narrator. The Buddhists have a term for this. They call the self an illusion. And modern neuroscience is starting to agree in a technical sense. Not that you don't exist, but that the self you experience is a construction, not a discovery. Let me push this further with a thought experiment that philosophers have loved for centuries. The ancient Greeks told the story of the Ship of Theseus. Theseus was a hero who sailed his ship for many years. The Athenians treasured this ship and kept it as a kind of monument. But ships rot, wood decays, ropes fray. So over time, as planks needed replacing, they replaced them. A plank here, a rope there, a mast, a rudder. Eventually, every single piece of the original ship had been swapped out, not all at once, but gradually, piece by piece, over many years. Question: was it still the Ship of Theseus? Now, if you say yes, it's still the same ship, then you're saying identity is about continuity of form and function, not material. The physical stuff can be completely replaced, and the ship remains the ship. If you say no, it's not the same ship, then you face a harder question. At what point did it stop being the Ship of Theseus, after the first plank was replaced? Surely not. One plank shouldn't destroy identity. The 50th plank? The last one? There seems to be no clear boundary. And here's Thomas Hobbes' twist from the 17th century. Suppose someone gathered all the discarded original planks, the rotted ones that were removed, and built a second ship from them. Now you have two ships, the gradually replaced ship in the harbor that has the continuous history, and the reassembled ship made of the original materials. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? They can't both be. Or can neither of them be? And if so, when did the real ship cease to exist? This isn't just an abstract puzzle for philosophers to argue about over wine. It applies directly to you. Your body is constantly replacing itself. Cells die and new ones are born. The atoms that make up your skin today were part of the food you ate last month, which was part of soil and rain and sunlight before that. You are literally made of recycled universe. Estimates vary, but many of the cells in your body are replaced over roughly 7 years. Your red blood cells turn over every 4 months. Your gut lining every few days. Your skin every 2 to 3 weeks. Your skeleton is completely remodeled about every 10 years. The atoms in your brain are more persistent. Neurons usually don't divide and get replaced, but even neurons incorporate new molecules. The proteins that make up your synapses turn over every few weeks. The lipids in your neural membranes are constantly being refreshed. So the stuff you're made of is constantly flowing in and out. You're like a whirlpool in a river. The water is always changing, but the pattern persists. In a very real physical sense, you're not the same person you were 7 years ago. The material has changed. The ship of you has been rebuilt. Yet you feel continuous. You remember being younger. You recognize your face in photographs from decades ago. The story of you carries on. This suggests something important. Identity isn't in the atoms. It's in the pattern. It's in the organization. It's in the story. You're not a thing. You're a process, a verb, not a noun, a fire that maintains its shape even as the fuel keeps changing. Think about a fire. The flames dancing in your fireplace are not a thing in the way a rock is a thing. Fire is a process. It's combustion. It's a pattern of chemical reactions that persists as long as there's fuel and oxygen. The actual atoms involved are constantly being replaced. Carbon from the wood becomes carbon dioxide in the air. New carbon enters the flame zone and combusts. Is it the same fire from one moment to the next? In one sense, no. The material is different. But in another sense, yes. The process continues. The pattern persists. You're like that. A pattern of matter and energy, processing information, maintaining itself through time. The self is not found, it's maintained. It's an ongoing achievement of your nervous system. Let me give you a concrete example of how fragile this constructed identity can be. There's a man named Clive Wearing, a British musician who suffered a viral infection that damaged his hippocampus in 1985. The hippocampus is crucial for forming new memories. Clive developed one of the most severe cases of amnesia ever documented. He can remember only the last few seconds of experience. Each moment feels to him like waking up for the first time. Every few minutes, he writes in his diary, "Now I am awake. Now I am conscious." Then he crosses out what he wrote before. because he has no memory of writing it. He doesn't recognize most people. He doesn't know what year it is. He experiences life as a series of disconnected nows with no continuous narrative threading them together. Yet two things remain: his musical ability and his love for his wife Deborah. When she walks into the room, even though he doesn't remember seeing her 5 minutes ago, he lights up with recognition and joy. He doesn't know he's already greeted her dozens of times today. Each greeting feels like a reunion after long absence. He embraces her, weeps with happiness, says he hasn't seen her in years, and then he does it again minutes later. And when he sits at the piano, he can still play brilliantly. His procedural memory, the how-to-do-things kind, is largely intact. He just can't remember that he played, or what piece, or who was listening. Clive's case shows us that the continuous self we experience depends critically on memory. Without the ability to string moments together into a narrative, identity fragments. But it also reveals that identity isn't a single thing, it's layers. Some persist even when the narrative dissolves. What does this tell us? Memory isn't just storage. It's the thread that stitches your identity together across time. Without it, you become a series of unconnected present moments. The story can't be told because there's no record of what came before. But here's something else to consider. Even in healthy people, memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're rebuilding it from fragmentary traces. And in the process, you change it. You edit it. You add details that weren't there. You remove things that were. Studies have shown that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. People will confidently remember details that simply didn't happen, and their confidence has little to do with accuracy. The interpreter doesn't just make up explanations for actions. It makes up memories too. What does this mean for identity? If your sense of self depends on memories, and memories are reconstructions rather than recordings, then your identity rests on a foundation that's constantly being rebuilt. The past you remember is partly a creation of the present. This is troubling if you want certainty, but it also suggests that change is possible. If the story can be misremembered, it can also be re-remembered. The meaning of the past is not fixed. Now, I want to take this in an even stranger direction. Let's think about what you actually are from the perspective of physics. You are approximately 7 octillion atoms. That's a 7 followed by 27 zeros. Mostly hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. These atoms were forged in stars billions of years ago and will persist for billions of years after you're gone. Let me say that again, because it's important. The atoms in your body are not new. They've been around for billions of years. The carbon in your fingernails was forged in the heart of a star that exploded before our sun even formed. The oxygen you breathe was made by ancient photosynthetic organisms. The iron in your blood comes from supernovae. You are, quite literally, made of stardust. That's not poetry. That's just physics. Now, from the point of view of the atoms, there's nothing special about the particular collection that happens to be you right now. They're just atoms doing what atoms do. They have no loyalty. They don't know they're part of a person. Each one is, as I like to say, stupidly minding its own business. Think about this. An atom of carbon in your brain might have spent millions of years as part of a rock, then was dissolved, carried by a river to the ocean, absorbed by plankton, eaten by a fish, eaten by a bird, deposited in soil, absorbed by a plant, eaten by you in a salad, and is now participating in a thought about atoms. And tomorrow, it might be breathed out as carbon dioxide and begin another journey entirely. It has no attachment to being part of you. It's just passing through. Yet somehow, this collection of oblivious particles has become aware of itself. It ponders its own existence. It worries about the future. It wonders about the meaning of life. It writes lectures about identity and then delivers them to audiences who are also collections of atoms wondering about themselves. How does that happen? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can trace the neural correlates. We can watch brain regions light up in scanners. We can describe the information processing with mathematical models. But we can't yet explain why there's something it's like to be you. Why there's an inner experience at all. Why the processing doesn't just happen in the dark, without anyone home to witness it. Why isn't the brain just a very sophisticated thermostat? A thermostat processes information, too. It senses temperature, compares it to a set point, and controls a furnace. But there's presumably nothing it's like to be a thermostat. No inner experience. Nobody home. What makes brains different? We don't know. That's the honest answer. I won't pretend to solve that problem today. Nobody has. The best minds in philosophy and neuroscience have wrestled with it for decades, and we still don't have an answer that satisfies everyone. But I want to point out something remarkable. The fact that you exist at all, that atoms have arranged themselves into a pattern capable of wondering about atoms, is extraordinary. I wrote a poem once, or rather I wrote down some thoughts in poetic form about this very thing. Atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity, stands at the sea, wonders at wondering. I, a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe. The universe has become aware of itself through you. That's not mysticism. That's just the physics. You are the universe looking at itself. The same matter that explodes in supernovas and drifts in nebulae is now contemplating its own nature. And what it's contemplating is, in large part, a story it's telling itself about being a self. Let me address a common misconception now. Some people here talk about the self being a construction, a narrative, an illusion in some sense, and they think, so the self isn't real. But that's not quite right. The self isn't unreal. It's just not the kind of thing we intuitively think it is. It's not some unchanging essence sitting behind your eyes like a captain steering a ship. It's more like a pattern that emerges from the complex interaction of brain, body, and world. A wave isn't unreal just because it's made of water that's constantly flowing. The wave is the pattern, the process. It's a real pattern, even though there's no fixed stuff that is the wave. Your identity is like that. It's a real pattern in the physical substrate of your brain, but it's dynamic, constructed, maintained by ongoing neural activity. It's not found. It's made. And it can be unmade, too, as we see in cases of amnesia, brain injury, or even just the gradual changes of aging. Here's another way to think about it. When you wake up each morning, your brain has to reconstruct your sense of self from the information available, the memories stored in your synapses, the sensations coming from your body, the expectations generated by your prediction machine. You've probably had that experience of waking from deep sleep and for just a moment, not knowing who or where you are. Then it all comes flooding back. Your identity reconstitutes. That flood isn't the discovery of a pre-existing self. It's the construction of the self for another day. The continuity we feel is partly a trick of memory. Your brain smooths over the gaps. It takes the highlight reel and presents it as a continuous movie. But you don't actually remember most of your life. You remember fragments, and your interpreter fills in a coherent story. This has practical implications. If identity is a story, it can be rewritten. Not arbitrarily. You can't just decide to be a different person and have it be so. The story is constrained by your brain's architecture, your accumulated experiences, your relationships with others, the physical facts of your existence. But within those constraints, there's more flexibility than we often assume. People do change. They revise their life narratives. They reinterpret past events. They shift their sense of who they are. Think about this. The same set of facts can tell very different stories depending on how they're framed. A difficult childhood can be a story of damage and victimhood, or it can be a story of resilience and growth. The facts don't change, but the meaning, the story told about those facts, can be transformed. Therapy often works precisely by helping people construct healthier narratives. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, helps people recognize and challenge the stories their brains automatically tell them. Everyone hates me becomes, I had a bad interaction with one person and my interpreter overgeneralized. The facts stay the same. The interpretation changes, and with it, the experience. This isn't just feel-good psychology. It's grounded in what we know about how the brain works. The interpreter is always making up stories anyway. You might as well help it make up more useful ones. Now, I want to be careful here. This doesn't mean you can just think yourself into being anyone. You can't wish away depression or trauma or genuine limitations. The story has to be connected to reality, or the predictive machinery will keep generating errors. A good narrative is one that helps you navigate the world more effectively, not one that denies what's actually there. But it does mean that you're not trapped by your past. The story is always being written, and you have some say in how it goes. And here's something even more interesting. Your sense of self isn't built in isolation. It's profoundly social. The default mode network I mentioned, it's also involved in thinking about other people. The same brain regions that generate your self-model generate your models of others. Think about that. The neural machinery for me and the neural machinery for you overlap substantially. From the brain's perspective, self and other are variations on the same theme. This suggests that self and other are deeply intertwined in the brain. You learn who you are partly by seeing yourself reflected in others' responses to you. When someone treats you as intelligent, you start to see yourself as intelligent. When you're treated as worthless, that becomes part of your self-story too. Your identity is co-constructed through social interaction. It's not just made inside your head, it's negotiated between heads. There's been fascinating research showing that in cultures that emphasize interdependence over individualism, the neural signatures of thinking about self and close others are more similar. In Western cultures, there's typically a clear neural distinction between thinking about myself and thinking about my mother. In some East Asian cultures, that distinction is blurred. The self is defined more in relation to family and community. This doesn't mean one way is right and the other is wrong. It means that how you construct your identity depends partly on the cultural context you're raised in. The brain is flexible. It builds the kind of self that works in its environment. This also means that loneliness isn't just sad, it's physiologically disorienting. Humans evolved to construct identity in a social context. Take away the social mirrors, and the self-construction process has less to work with. We need others, not just for emotional comfort, but for the ongoing project of figuring out who we are. Let me complicate things further. You might think, okay, even if the self is constructed, at least the constructor is unified. There's one brain doing the constructing, but even that's questionable. Remember the split brain patients? When the connection between hemispheres is cut, something like two separate conscious agents can emerge. Each hemisphere has its own preferences, its own responses, its own way of interpreting the world, and they can disagree. There are cases of one hand unbuttoning a shirt while the other buttons it back up. Different intentions, different agencies, in the same body. What does this tell us? It suggests that the unified self we feel is itself a product of integration between brain systems. It's not the starting point, it's the achievement. And it depends on those systems being connected. Now, in normal brains, the hemispheres are connected, but the brain is still modular. It's made of specialized systems that don't always communicate perfectly. The emotional centers might push in one direction while the planning centers push in another. You've experienced this as inner conflict. Part of you wants the cake, part of you wants to lose weight. Part of you wants to stay up late. Part of you knows you need sleep. Who's the real you? Both of them. Neither of them. The you emerges from the interaction of all these subsystems. It's not a homunculus, a little person inside your head making all the decisions. It's more like a parliament with different factions vying for control, and the interpreter weaving their outputs into a coherent-seeming narrative. One psychologist, Marvin Minsky, called this the society of mind. You're not one self, you're many selves, many agents cooperating and competing. What you experience as I is the emergent product of all this activity presented to consciousness as a unified whole. This is why we can surprise ourselves, why we sometimes do things we didn't plan to do and then rationalize them afterward, why we can simultaneously want contradictory things. The unified self is a useful fiction, maintained by the interpreter to give the illusion of coherent agency. But here's the key insight. It's a useful fiction. It serves a purpose. Having a sense of unified identity helps you navigate the world, maintain relationships, plan for the future, take responsibility for your actions. The fiction isn't worthless just because it's constructed. A map isn't worthless just because it isn't the territory. Now let me step back and ask, what does all this mean? If you've followed me this far, you might be feeling a bit unsettled. The ground beneath your sense of self is shakier than you thought. But I want to suggest that this isn't cause for despair. It's cause for wonder. The fact that identity is constructed doesn't make it less valuable. A symphony is constructed from notes. A friendship is constructed from interactions. A life is constructed from experiences. A marriage is constructed from countless small moments of attention and care. Construction doesn't mean arbitrary. The self that emerges from your brain is shaped by real constraints, your genetics, your history, your relationships, the structure of your nervous system. It's a particular self, not just any self. It's yours, in the most meaningful sense. And there's something liberating about understanding the mechanism. When you see the interpreter at work, you can take its explanations less seriously. You can be more curious about your actual motivations rather than just accepting the first story your brain offers. You can ask, is this really why I did that? Or is this just a plausible post hoc rationalization? When you recognize that identity is a process, you can be more compassionate toward your own changes. You're not betraying your true self by evolving. You're just updating the story. Growth is possible. Change is natural. The self you are tomorrow doesn't have to be a replica of the self you are today. When you understand the social dimension, you can appreciate how deeply your sense of self is woven together with others. Independence and interdependence aren't opposites. They're both part of the pattern. You are you, and you are also shaped by everyone you've known. And when you glimpse that your conscious experience is a controlled hallucination, you can be humbled and astonished. Humbled because you never directly touch reality. Astonished because somehow this hallucination has become aware of itself. And that is perhaps the most extraordinary thing in the universe. Think about it. The universe is, for the most part, unconscious. Rocks don't wonder. Stars don't ponder. Galaxies don't ask questions. But in this tiny corner, on this little planet, matter has arranged itself into patterns that can contemplate their own existence, that can ask, who am I? And puzzle over the answer. That's not nothing. That's extraordinary. Let me leave you with one more thought. Actually, let me leave you with a few more thoughts, because this is important and I want to make sure you really feel it. Every night when you go to sleep, especially in deep, dreamless sleep, the narrative stops. The self that you experienced during waking life is gone. There's no continuous observer floating through the night, waiting to return. There's just neural activity doing its maintenance work, consolidating memories, clearing out metabolic waste, and then, upon waking, the self is reconstructed. In a sense, you die every night and are reborn every morning. The continuity is an illusion maintained by memory and the brain's relentless storytelling. Now, some people find this idea disturbing. If I'm not continuous, if the self is just a story that gets written each day, then what does that mean about death, about the future, about making plans? Here's how I think about it. You've already died 1,000 times, in this sense. The you from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, from childhood, that person isn't here anymore. Not really. The atoms are different. The brain connections are different. The thoughts and feelings and goals are different. Yet there's a continuity of pattern, a thread of story that links them all together. You survived all those little deaths. You're still here in some meaningful sense, even though everything has changed. And when the final death comes, the one where the pattern stops being maintained entirely, it's not fundamentally different. It's just that the story ends. The pattern dissolves. The atoms go elsewhere to be parts of other things. I don't say this to be morbid. I say it to highlight how remarkable it is that you exist at all. Out of all the possible arrangements of matter, here's one that can contemplate its own existence. That can appreciate a sunset. That can love another person. That can wonder about the meaning of it all. Every moment of consciousness is a gift, not in a sentimental sense, but in a literal physical sense. It's something rather than nothing. And there's no guarantee of the next moment. The pattern persists until it doesn't. Now, here's a thought experiment for you. Suppose scientists developed a teleporter. You step into a booth, and the machine scans every atom in your body with perfect precision. Then it disassembles you, atom by atom, transmits the information to another location, and reassembles you there from new atoms in exactly the same configuration. The new version has all your memories, all your personality, every physical detail. From the inside, they would feel completely continuous with the person who stepped into the booth. Is that person you? Think about it. The atoms are different. There's a gap in the physical continuity, but the pattern is preserved. The story continues, without the narrator even noticing a break. Some people say, yes, that's clearly still you. The pattern is what matters, not the particular atoms. We already established that atoms don't carry identity. Other people say, no, that's a copy. The original you was destroyed. The fact that a duplicate exists doesn't help the original. I don't know the right answer. I'm not sure there is a right answer. But I think the question reveals something important about how we think about identity. We want identity to be something solid, something definite, something that either exists or doesn't. But the reality may be messier. Identity is a process, a pattern, a story, and those things don't have sharp boundaries. The same ambiguity applies to more everyday scenarios. When you change your mind about something fundamental, are you still the same person? When you forget something important, is a piece of you gone? When you learn something new, have you created a new self? There are no crisp answers. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the ambiguity is the truth. Here's the bottom line. You are not what you think you are. You're not a fixed thing, an unchanging essence, a soul sitting behind your eyes. You're a process, a pattern, a story being told by a brain that can't help but tell stories. But you are what you are. This particular process, this particular pattern, this particular story, it's real, it matters, it's the most immediate thing you'll ever know. And the fact that it's constructed doesn't diminish it, it elevates it. Because it means that consciousness, identity, self, these are achievements. They're things the universe does in certain special configurations of matter. They're what happens when atoms start paying attention. You are atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity. Every morning when you wake up, a miracle happens. Not a supernatural miracle, but a natural one. Out of the chaos of neural activity, a self emerges, a you. Someone who can remember yesterday and plan for tomorrow. Someone who can love and wonder and worry and hope. But here you are, awake, aware, wondering. And that's not nothing. That's extraordinary. You are a pattern that persists, a process that reflects, a story that tells itself. Is identity just a story your brain tells? Yes. But what a story. What an astonishing, improbable, beautiful story. I, a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe, standing at the sea, wondering at wondering. What a strange, beautiful, impossible thing to be. Now, I'm curious what you think. Here's a question for you. If you could talk to yourself from 10 years ago, do you think you'd feel like you're talking to the same person or someone quite different? Write down your answer and think about what that tells you about the nature of identity.